Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scott Bertram.
We continue a series of episodes from presentations delivered at Hoogland Center for Teacher Excellence seminars. The Hoogland Center for Teacher Excellence, an outreach of the Hillsdale College K-12 Education Office, offers educators the opportunity to deepen their content knowledge and refine their skills in the classroom. These one-day conferences are hosted during the academic year in cities across the nation and feature presentations by Hillsdale College faculty, K-12 office staff, and leaders in the Hillsdale network of member schools. There is no cost to attend, and attendees may earn professional development credits. Currently, the Hoogland Center is hosting a series exploring the art of teaching a variety of subjects. To learn more about upcoming events, visit our website, k12.hillsdale.edu.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you've chosen wisely. Dr. Peterson's talk on seminar 8 years ago is one of the most formative that I have ever received as a teacher. And he's about to give it next door. So I won't be hugely offended if you hear that and then run for the door. I will be a little offended. I won't be hugely offended. I'm going to talk to you guys today about teaching close reading. And I come to you even 11 years in the middle of things, very much so. Not just because 5:30 a.m. Atlanta time, where I'm from, is 2:30 a.m. Newport Beach time, and my body is tuned to wake up so I can actually read with 4 kids at 5:30, and so I've been in the land of the waking for a long time today. But also because we are always honing our practice as teachers. And so my mental model for this talk is to just think out loud with you through this very challenging topic of, can we get students to read really complicated texts closely, right? Can we send them off with these texts and expect that they will do something with them that we hope they're going to do? So I have a number of topics that I will try to gather my thoughts around such that it is somewhat organized. But my mental model of this is to give you guys as many of the thoughts as I can fit into 48 minutes, which is what this talk timed out to, with the idea that something is going to stick with you, a formulation, a topic, a framework, or a practice. So hopefully you take something away from the many things I'm about to throw at you. As I mentioned, I have 4 children. They're 6, 4, 2, and 9 months. And so a lot of the reading that I'm doing right now is at bedtime. And in thinking about preparing this talk, I was thinking each night as I read to my children. I have read The Hobbit, and I've read Mr. Popper's Penguins, and I've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I'm now in the middle of The Wing Feather Saga by Andrew Peterson, which I've never read before, and I'm really enjoying. And there are 2, without being too cliched, I suppose I am, now I'm going to be, but the bedtime is the best, bedtime reading is kind of the best of times and the worst of times, right? And so imagine with me it's 6:47 p.m. in the Schepps household in scenario number 1, and that is Megan and I, my wife, need to leave at 7 p.m. We have to get out the door to something. And we sit down to read. What is it like reading in that scenario? Every child who falls from where she is sitting is a kind of explosion of distraction that deters me. Every child who asks me for the definition of a word is a cause for fury, and I'm irritable, and I'm distracted all throughout my time reading because I'm actually thinking of something else. And so it's a very distracted kind of reading that maybe we make our way through the 5 pages that I hope we're going to make our way through, but it is not of much value. Then imagine with me scenario number 2. There is no limit. And we might read for the same amount of time. Maybe it's 13 minutes and 5 pages. But a child falling from where she is sitting is an invitation to laughter. And a child asking for the definition of a word is an invitation to define it and maybe expand on something in the story and give them a greater view into what we are reading. And that second scenario is an experience of free reading. And I think that most of us have probably had an experience of free reading, a true freedom in our engagement with the text. The analogy isn't perfect for many reasons, but I've been thinking, how do I set up my students for an experience of the latter, knowing there are so many reasons that they're going to have experiences of reading that are like scenario number 1 of distraction and irritability and a lack of focus and freedom. I think that we want to be preparing our students for the freedom and the freedom of deep attention and the transformation that it brings with it to read in that way. And I think that close reading describes both the experience and the product of reading like this. So I'm going to try to take it on from both angles. I have a kind of quotation for you. I have many, but the first one is, I think my life didn't seem my life until I started reading. And this was said by, or will be said by, one of your students, theoretically. All right, I actually stole this from a January New York article by the poet Louis Gluck, who said, I think my life didn't seem my life until I started writing. But this is to posit the transformative power of close reading. This is to foreground these 2 themes that I'm trying to set out of freedom and transformation. There is a kind of ancient trajectory to education that was articulated a couple different places of mimesis and then morphosis that then led to participation in the polis. But you start off with imitation, something simple, maybe it's grammatical, maybe it's imitating a teacher, and then that leads to the transformation of the person who is being drawn out and being educated such that they will be formed and then engage with the city as a citizen. And I think that we are hoping to form certain kinds of citizens, and I hope that we are forming reading citizens and those who are being shaped by reading. In this talk, just to frame it up for you, I am going to first try to set out a compelling mental model of the act of reading, to kind of keep going along this opening track, actually pick up a lot on what Mr. Villarreal was talking about in terms of the imagination, maybe disagree with him in a couple of nuanced ways, we'll see. I would love to talk with him more. And then I'm going to set out 2 frameworks. The first is to connect class citizenship to close reading, to convince students that they have responsibilities as a reader. Then I'm going to share with you a framework that I've now used for 9 or 10 years of 3 tiers of questioning that have been a very helpful scaffold in preparing my students for close reading. And then, time permitting, I'm just going to blast through 16, 17 possible practices that I might recommend to your classes, not for you to take on wholesale, but maybe one of them would be useful. All right, so this is a quotation. I've quoted Matthew Arnold saying that we should put the best of what has been thought and said in human history so many times, and I recently discovered this similar quotation from George MacDonald, who wrote The Princess and the Goblin, another great Schepps bedtime reading from the last couple of years. And he's talking here about books in a very beautiful way. He says, in books, we not only have the store of all results of the imagination, but in them, as in her workshop, we may behold her embodying before our very eyes, in music of speech and wonder of words, till her work, like a golden dish set with shining jewels and adorned by the hands of the cunning workman, stands finished before us. In this kind, then, the best must be set before the learner, that he may eat and not be satisfied, for the finest products of the imagination are of the best nourishment for the beginnings of that imagination. And the mind of the teacher must mediate between the work of art and the mind of the pupil, bringing them together in the vital contact of intelligence, directing the observation to the lines of expression, the points of force, and helping the mind to repose upon the whole. I think it's a long quote, but quotation. I think that it summarizes much of what we are hoping to do as teachers in literature courses, which is to mediate between a student and the world of a work of art such that the contact between them might be vital and that they might have a kind of rest and enjoyment in the whole. I think that a couple of injunctions maybe come out of this, which is read great books, and to answer a question that came up in the last talk, read them in full, read them as the artist intended for you to read them, which was as a complete work, as much as is possible. I know that there are exigencies you must consider, but read and delight in a world of a work of art that's been left for you by a genius as it's been left for you. I'll get more to that in a moment. All right, I have a couple of these kind of imagined dialogues between you and me. And so I'm imagining, not that you do not know the answer to this question or have your own, but that in coming to a talk about close reading, you might say, well, before you even get to close reading, what is reading? I'll posit, reading is a use of the imagination that also shapes the imagination. Okay, what is the imagination? We got a couple of definitions just now. Here's mine. The imagination is the human faculty that uses memory, desire, feeling, and projection to complete, organize, ornament, which is another word for complete, make sense of, and draw meaning from all kinds of experiences. And with it, we can also make new images. So, what kind of use of the imagination is reading? In the act of reading literature, a person interacts with words written by an author. Simple. The author creates a world in words, and through reading those words, a person enters that world. A good reader uses her imagination to engage with story, metaphor, order, presence, absence, augmentation, limitation, redirection, pattern, type, and character in order to enter this world. So how does reading shape the imagination? Well, let's talk more about that. This is from the end of an essay by Alison Milbank called Making Strange, which is a beautiful meditation on what stories, especially kind of fantastical fairy stories, she talks about Tolkien, Lewis, and others, can do for a student. And she, near the end of the essay, says, the imagination I've described here redeems this tragic separation of phenomena, that which we perceive, and noumena, that which is hidden. And it also avoids being anti-rational. Indeed, as I have tried to demonstrate, it has a certain intellectual toughness. It suggests, however, that reason does need rescuing, and we can do so by recasting the limit to understanding from a negation to an opening out to mystery. So, let us use every imaginative tool at our disposal to awaken the imaginative sense, and then use reason to explain the difference this viewpoint makes to our experience of the whole of reality, which is restored to us in all of its fullness. So imagination, kind of in its fundamental form, is useful in completing the familiar, right? The Germans call this Gestalt formation. But then from that foundation of interact with familiar, the imagination can lead us out into the strange, the unfamiliar, the beyond, the transcendent. And eventually, having entered into the strange, it can help us return back to reality, right? Paul Ricoeur would say we go in front of the text and then we come back to the reality after having encountered the text. I'll quote him later on as well. This is a kind of mysterious, perhaps amorphous and abstract claim about what we're up to in literature classes, but I think that using every imaginative tool at our disposal to awaken the imaginative sense is a description of what we're doing, and what we're doing over the course of many, many years, then it's going to take many years to do this well, right? And that we need to kind of give ourselves the permissions of knowing that this is a many-year project to awaken the imaginative sense properly in our students. I have a teacher who said that the role of the teacher of literature is to make a work of art comprehensible without making it ordinary, which I think is a great challenge as we're just trying to help students comprehend what they've read, as we're seeing if they have done their reading, right? As we're trying to tell them about things like that are, I don't necessarily do this, but rising action and climax and falling action and things that, little patterns that we've imposed on art to try to make it comprehensible, but ultimately we might just make it ordinary in the end, which I think would be a great loss. Instead, I want to set out a few, I want to expand on this idea of making strange and set out a few further ends of reading. These are in addition to the common, perhaps, classical goals of initiating students into the great conversation, of inculcating the skills of logic and rhetoric after having inculcated the skills of grammar and of ordering their affections. These, I think, operate within, perhaps, these wider goals. But there are things that are unique to reading great literature that we ought to have in our minds. Each one of these phrases has been really significant to me at a different point in the last 10 years and has guided my own teaching in a different way. The first, I'll return to this in a moment when quoting Heidegger, is that we are giving students an electric experience of and in the world of a work of art. All right, so that there's something dynamic and that engages the whole person when we are reading a work of literature. We might also be helping students acquire the mind of an author. I got this phrase from John Baer writing about reading the Church Fathers, but it's another way of thinking what we are doing in time over the encounter with a piece of literature, that we're helping students acquire the mind in some small way of a genius. We are seeding in students, hopefully, the desire for independent reading of great works in the future. This might seem like an impossible hope, but we must be hoping that students will read great works on their own later on, and we are opening students toward a transcendent plane of meaning and existence. A great recent article by Joshua Gibbs talks about the teacher as an ambassador from the transcendent plane of meaning to the student, just convincing, like, hey, I come from a place where there is transcendent meaning that goes beyond the banal realities that you are engaging in day to day. Let me tell you about it. This is a beautiful quotation from a guy named Michael Polanyi, who wrote a book called Personal Knowledge and another called Tacit Learning. But this is from a short and beautiful essay called What is a Painting that I highly recommend. And in it he says, the factual information content of art is slight. I think this is a controversial and significant statement to say. It doesn't really matter if the kids I taught 3 years ago about the Iliad remember many of the details of the Iliad. The main purpose of having read that book with them was to evoke a participation in its utterance. And I think that this is an important disposition toward art and toward literature that we ought to bring to it, that the purpose of reading it along with students is that our reading it completes it as a work, that it is our indulgence which sets the author free, as Shakespeare says through Prospero at the end of The Tempest. He's asking a reader, please, would you read this thing as I left it for you? Would you let it teach you? And more importantly, would you let it delight you, as Horace and then later Sir Philip Sidney would say, right? This is participative idea of what it is that we're doing in reading a book. And I think that it is an important disposition to bring to students, because I think it's going to make the possibility of their being interested in reading closely more possible if we're saying, hey, come co-create this thing along with Shakespeare, along with Homer, along with Robert Penn Warren, Flannery O'Connor, whoever it is, Fyodor Dostoevsky, whoever it is that you're reading. You have an important role as a co-creator with them to participate in the utterance. It's stuttering, even though it's a genius piece of work, to utter into the world. I think that if students catch a vision for this, they can really get into it. Tolkien addresses this idea in the essay on fairy stories, and he calls it subcreation. I recommend that essay as well. All right, here's another dialogue that maybe turns us closer to our topic at hand, which you might be wondering if I will get to. All right, so what is close reading? I'll say, close reading is the kind of reading that simultaneously leads to and emerges from an electric experience of the world of a text, from participating in utterance. All right. That's nice. Do you have a more tangible definition? I think at this point I've been abstract enough. Let me try to start walking toward that. A close reading is when a student offers analysis that goes beyond the factual information content of a text and reveals that they are interacting more directly with an author's world and thought and genius. And then you might ask, how could I possibly tell if this has happened? And I think it will show up. I think it will show up in discussion. It will show up in student writing if students are doing this. And then you might ask, how can I set up students to perform a close reading? How can I occasion this? And I would say it won't be easy. Right? Not every student will readily demonstrate that they are reading closely, but all students, I would contend, are capable of close reading. And there may be a few things you can do to get things going. Right? This might be the most practical slide I am taking from Dr. Justin Jackson and Dr. Dutton Carney, who have a forthcoming book. They're still preparing it, called The Elements of Analysis. And these are the 5 features of a close reading that they set out as you're teaching students to analyze that you should look for in student they're talking about writing. I would start with discussion and think about short bits of writing in class, maybe close reading quizzes, which I'll talk about, and then ultimately more formal writing assignments. First, students should offer a summary. They should set out relevant plot and character details that give context to their close reading. Not too much, not sentence upon sentence, but set up what they are about to do, which is parse a individual word, a very short phrase, maybe a short passage that they intend to analyze. And in this parsing, they might define some key words. After this, students must identify patterns. This is kind of the trickiest part of these 5 to name. But here, a student is describing how a word or passage connects to textual or thematic or logical trajectory in the book. Right? You might think of the motif of the woman of the well, or the word pietas in the Aeneid, or the idea of active love or sensuality in the Brothers Karamazov, right? Where you're looking at those are maybe a little bit trite, but you're looking for something that's happening recurrently in the text, right? Whether it be a textual or a thematic pattern, and then you are offering an insight within that. You're taking that trajectory and you're looking closely at one word, a short phrase, maybe a passage, and saying this is how this word or short phrase or passage functions to deepen or redirect, augment, foreshorten the reader's understanding within that trajectory or of that word or theme or motif in the book. And then you must articulate that insight. Show why it's substantial. Show why it matters. Right? So to take this one phrase that Father Zosima speaks about active love as he's talking about the doctor who says, I love humanity, but I hate my neighbor, and say this exposes the proximity of envy and love, of love and tyranny, of hatred and love, of murder and resurrection. You can actually do that with a single word from time to time in a great text. So these are the 5 features of a close read, and you may have them in mind as we get to some practical suggestions later, and I must give credit. I asked them if I could do this, if I could reference it, or asked Dr. Carney if I could talk about these 5 features and look out for the close reading version of Strunk and White Elements of Analysis to come in some number of years or months. Now, you might be thinking about a number of fundamental tensions as we set out these abstract ideas and these practical ones. And that is that, first, you can't know what a student is doing at home. And you can't perform an act of close reading for a student. And you are going to be filled with suspicion when they come back to class that they have actually read on their own for a number of reasons. Moreover, many of the demands on a student, some of which you are putting on them by other requirements in your class of studying grammar, of preparing students to write longer assignments and talking about composition, these cut against the time and attention needed to read closely, not to mention the travel sports that they're participating in and their phones. And then even kind of in the background, and this might get at some further questions from the Q&A time of the last talk, there are some features of our present social imaginary, as the philosopher Charles Taylor would call it, that really work against the possibility of close reading. The first, I'm stealing this from a guy named Matthew Crawford, distraction as a design principle. We are programmed to redirect our attention over and over by the technology that we use oftentimes, but not just that. I think that there's a way in which I think our economic superstructure also leads us to distraction, fruitful distraction, but distraction as a design principle. And then this one's really interesting. We are in the habit of making texts about something else, merely history or biography of the author, or politics, or maybe even moral lessons. And I would contend that often does violence to the text and foreshortens the possibility that you might actually have an electric experience with that work of art if you are redirecting it back to certain kinds of moral discussions. Note in the very, very background, I'm not even addressing what might be your most fundamental concerns, which are about reading comprehension and academic honesty, and especially in our age of what happened in the 17th chapter of Brothers Karamazov. And it's not Shmoop or SparkNotes, it's a really nice little tidy summary from ChatGPT. I'm not addressing that. I think that my ideas about class citizenship start to address it, but I can't say that I've defeated that problem. And we could talk about remediation, scaffolding, if that's your biggest issue in the Q&A, or I'd talk to you afterward about some of the things that have worked. I'm kind of ending in my beginning here to say to be a work means to set up a world, and this is one of my favorite essays ever, The Origin of a Work of Art, as Martin Heidegger says, to come to a work of art in the way that you are asked to experience it by the very existence of it having been created by a genius. You must pare away the hindrances of your own predilections and of the exigent distractions of history and politics, moral lessons, things like this, in order to experience it directly and to let it be a thing, a story unto itself that you experience in a free way. And that is going to be how it might transform you if you step into it in that way. All right, so I promised 2 frameworks. The first thing that my mind immediately goes to this when I think about teaching students to read well is class citizenship. This might seem counterintuitive, this might seem unrelated, this might seem like an odd starting point, but you simply can't just hand kids a book and say, go home and read this, right? You have to actually set up a class culture in which you have given them reasons to and tools with which to read it well. And I would contend that the first one is an idea of their responsibility as a reader. I think that we should be conceiving of our classes as sacred spaces that are kind of cultures, even little cities unto themselves. A guy named Stephen Turley, in his book Awakening Wonder, talks nicely about this a couple of times. So yes, this is where I start, even if it seems like an unexpected place to start when I think about teaching students to read. I think that you must set up a reading culture, right? So you should describe the habits of a good citizen in your class in general. You should describe the responsibilities of a reader in particular, and you should describe the mental and physical habits even of a good reader as you are setting kids up to read. You should make students aware of what they owe to a great author, to you as a teacher, to each other as students in your class, and to themselves as someone in possession of a mind and a heart and a body and a soul. This is one of many quotations that I have in the background of this notion of class citizenship from Alistair McIntyre in After Virtue. He's talking about building a city, but I think you could talk about building a school or even a sacred space class. He says, those who participate in building a school or a great class will need to develop 2 quite different types of evaluative practice, ways of thinking about what they're doing. On the one hand, they would need to praise as excellences those qualities of mind and character which would contribute to the realization of their common good or goods. That is, they would need to recognize a certain set of qualities as virtues and the corresponding set of defects as vices. They would also need, however, to identify certain types of actions as the doing of the production of harm of such an order that they destroy the bonds of community in such a way as to render the doing or achieving of good impossible. The table of virtues promulgated into such a classroom would teach its students what kinds of actions would gain them merit and honor as students, as readers. I think that it's so important that we are praising the excellences of good reading and of good class citizenship. Here are a number of ideas on this, right? With regard to just the habits of a good class citizen, again, students should have an imagination for what they owe each other and the other relevant parties in the classroom. They should think of themselves as moral agents in almost everything that they do. They should know, with regard to reading and literature, that good reading can begin with good listening to you, but maybe most of all to one another in discussion. Right? You should name the virtues and vices of good class citizenship with particular attention to class discussion and to reading. You should also tell them about the responsibilities of a reader, the privilege and responsibility that is to be handed a book, like a book that you are handing them. You should foreground everything we've talked about, the transcendence of books and the genius of great authors. They should not be anywhere near to criticizing Homer, right? They should know that would be anathema in your classroom. You should talk about the electric and dynamic possibility of co-creation as something that they're getting to participate in, right? That they get to redeem and complete the work of Shakespeare should be something that matters. I would encourage you, take a few moments each semester to say, what are we doing together? Have you thought about what it is that we are doing, right? So many times I hear adults many years on from school say, man, I wish I could go back and read the Iliad in your class. I wish I could go back and read, Chaucer with Mr. McClatchy. It's like, well, can we make students aware of the privilege of what they have when they have it? In a way, no, right? That's how life works. But we can try. This one is interesting. It's become more and more apparent to me over the last couple of years. Like 10 years ago, my students knew how to sit in a room, and they seem to be forgetting before my very eyes. I think that we should be talking about the actual, both the mental and the physical habits of good reading. Mentally, you should tell them, read every word. I tell my students this a lot. I require them to annotate. I have different guidance for different books. Also, you should be talking to them about their bodies. Right? You should say, in a room, this is how you sit. This is how you face each other. This is how you turn to someone who is about to speak. Right? This is how you prepare yourself to speak. And then, I think maybe most importantly, we should be asking students where they're reading at home and giving them ideas of how they should dispose themselves to their books at home. This can bring up socioeconomic difference between your students, right? When you ask, hey, where are you reading? What is your reading situation like? So be careful about this, but I think it's important for us to be commenting even on this kind of habit in students. My first possible practice is that you should complete a reading in silence in your class. Maybe this is not a novel idea. Assign a full homework, read the whole thing together, and then maybe for 30 minutes, and then take 10 minutes to ask students, how did it go? What did you notice? I just read, for reasons of scheduling, my seniors just read the first 120 pages or so of Brothers Karamazov in class. And they are, I think, more in love with the book for having had that focused landscape to begin their reading of the book with than in past years when that hasn't been the case. This is another long quotation. Another one in the back of my mind is from Book 3 of Aristotle's Politics, where he talks about the bonds of common sacrifice and the brotherhood that emerges from this. I've already have too many long quotes. This one's a recent one that I read from Gabriel Marcel in a kind of long essay that's basically a book, Man Against Mass Society. He says, there's every reason to believe that it is only within very restricted groups, very small communities, that freedom can really be exercised in the service of grace. Such communities may assume very different forms, a parish, certainly, but also some straightforward business or professional undertaking, or classroom, a school, for instance, but also, for all I know, an inn. One should also add that these groups should not be close communities in the Bergsonian sense, but on the contrary, they should be open to each other and linked by tactful intermediaries, teachers, and their books that they're bringing with them, perhaps traveling from one community to another. Between these groups, tiers should grow up, giving them the unity of grains and an ear of corn, but certainly not that of the mere elements lumped together in an aggregate. What we have to create is the living tissue. Right? This is, I think, a possibility of what we do when we read together with our students in a classroom that has become sacred, is that we give them a different kind of quality of living tissue to their lives that has happened because freedom has been exercised in the service of grace together as we read books together. The ultimate goal of class citizenship as a framework is what I'm calling here freedom through virtue. Right? Remember, freedom and transformation are the two pillars in the back of our minds here. I would say that it's freedom through acting as a good citizen toward the author, toward the teacher, toward the classmates, and toward oneself, right? And that this is a kind of political virtue that students can exercise as good class citizens. All right, my second framework, my second kind of scaffold that I think you might want to try to lean on as you are trying to guide students toward good, close reading, would be a shared vocabulary especially around questioning. All right, this is presuming that you are teaching through discussion and that you're asking students a lot of questions in how you are encountering a text. And this is a set of 3 tiers of questioning that we have used for a long time at Atlanta Classical. You don't necessarily need to take it on exactly as we have, but I would encourage you to have some kind of shared vocabulary that you're setting out for students that you are also offering to them for them to work with, to play around with. This is ours. Plot questions, character questions, and author's questions. You can conceive of them as kind of circles narrowing in toward a middle. I think that kind of actually accounts for them quantitatively decently well. Or tiers ascending deepening, however. Plot questions, that's your introductory tier. What happened? What exactly happened? I think that this second question is really important, that you are drawing students' attention toward the details you want to draw them toward for the sake of your discussion. And then we get into the meat of what it is to ask questions about literature together, which we call character questions, which is to foreground the fact that we're trying to talk about characters as if they just left the room, right? As if these are people that we know. And if we can get students to do this, we might be getting them closer to wanting to go back to an electric experience of their text that night. So these are questions like, why did characters say what they said and do what they did? There's a lot of things that fit into the character questions tier for us. It's looking at the interaction of the pieces of the world of a work of literature and asking, when they bump into each other, what do we see? How do they interact? Ultimately, we are looking to get to what we call the author's questions or author's questions. And here we're asking, what about the human condition bothered a genius so much that she wrote this book? Right? And I think that this is an important framing for us and our students, because it's thinking about that idea of acquiring the mind of an author, that we're saying somebody wrote something that's now been being read for 3,000 years or 300 years, and likely where they started, I would contend maybe definitely where they started, was with questions that were bothering them about the tensions and ambiguities of existence. And they are wriggling their way through those questions in the form of this story, in the form of this world of a work of literature. And I think that we can get to know and write the different questions that are bothering authors enough to write the books that they're writing. So, some ideas about how to use these three tiers of questioning, or however you name your own framework as you approach text. As I say, share your framework with students. I do this, and I foreground that final tier of authors' questions and really kind of emphasize these to students and say, hey, we're looking to get at these. And I'm going to use them in my planning, and then use them in your planning. All right, lesson plan with your framework in mind. For me, I encourage my teachers that a lesson plan should just be a giant list of questions. If you have other regulations on you, maybe it needs to look differently. But your questions, your preparation, your second and third reading of a text should have this framework in mind. And then write your study questions, whether those are for homework or something students do in class, and have students proceed through the three tiers. What did Huck say to Jim? What is the current status of their relationship? Plot, character. What are the basic tensions, the fundamental tensions and benefits of friendship, right? There is a plot, a character, and an author's question right in a row. This one is, I think, a really, really important one that we've come on to across disciplines at Atlanta Classical recently. By the way, we've articulated three tiers of questioning for every discipline, and they're different in each one, is to invite students to generate questions, right? Maybe it's on day one of the Iliad. I find my 5 authors' questions that I use the entire semester with the Iliad in the first 9 lines, and we write them together as a class the first day of class. Right? And then we are living with those questions the entire time. But each year they're different. They're the same in category, but they're different in form because students are writing them together with me in that first day of discussion. So the beginning of a book or the end of a book is a great time to generate this list about a text. It depends on how you do things. We do seminars that we grade from time to time individually, where students know what the question or questions are in advance. And usually we are guiding them through the 3 tiers of questioning with a question or 2. A question means 3 questions, but they have those in hand in advance of a day of discussion. And then write essay assignments with these tiers in mind. Write that assignment sheet with a nod toward the fact that you're asking students to progress through summary to parsing and pattern that take into account character questions, and where you're expecting the articulation of their insight to include something really substantive that is an author's question, so-called. The goal of this framework, as I put it here, is freedom through self-understanding. Maybe better put self-mastery, maybe better put self-awareness. I think that students can experience free reading and then the transformation that comes from that if they have a kind of self-awareness, kind of metacognition around what it is that you are saying is happening to them in a class. All right. This kind of resolves the 2 frameworks that I wanted to set out for you, and now it gets to a bunch of ideas For practices, I've set out a few now. I have in class and then assessment and then writing assignment. I'll move really quickly through these. The first is to read to students. Read to students often. I often read things that are not what we're studying. I read a separate piece day by day for the whole fall to my seniors. We don't really discuss it almost at all, just read it to them. This is, we're having a pure engagement that I'm not ever going to assess you on of a great text. Foreground the text in discussion. Make students open their books and read to you. Read long sections of text. Tell students how they should be paying attention if you're going to read a really long paragraph to them. Describe their habits of both physical and attentional of how they're supposed to do that. But always be coming back to the text. My notes on the board are often just 5 words of a quotation, 5 words of a quotation. The whole thing, the whole board is just filled with the quotations that have come up in the course of discussion if it's not a seminar day. This one is, it's kind of ridiculous that I put this on as a bullet point, but teach through questions. This is something we've had now several years of faculty discussion about at Atlanta Classical, but it's what I'm suggesting here is kind of a disposition more than a built-out practice to come to your students as the lead questioner about a great text. From time to time, do a close reading in a kind of methodical way in front of students. So take a passage and then parse from it and then give an insight and then articulate that insight and tell them, I'm doing each one of these things in a row. This was the summary, this was the parsing, this was the pattern, this is the insight, this is the articulation. And I do it in different colors so that they're seeing each of the 5 things. Use the phrase, this is really simple, but maybe most important, that's a close reading. Like when a student says something like, Ian, yes, what you just said about the blubber, like that was a close reading. You identified it within a pattern and you are showing how there is an insight to be had in Moby Dick about this tiny little phrase. I think that drawing attention to someone other than you who has just done it can be really important. And then I have model and describe firsthand experiences. This is my friend who is being trained in preaching told me that he was told that maybe the most important thing about preaching well is to be experiencing Scripture firsthand for himself, and that your congregation would know if you've stopped that, right? So you should be reading probably the things you're teaching, but also other things as well. And then beyond class, something that we've started to do at ACA a lot is to boost the signal of independent reading by faculty and then also of students. A couple of times a year, we collect what faculty are reading actively and just make a big poster that just has all the titles of what faculty are reading. We buy a lot of books for faculty. This is something we're able to do. But we're kind of constantly just saying, hey, we want reading to be happening around campus. And we are going to glorify it when we see it. All right, this might be the most important practical recommendation I have, which is to have close reading quizzes. This should take 5 to 10 minutes. You offer the students a passage, either pre-parsed or a little bit of a longer passage where you're asking them to pull something out of it. And you're asking, hey, identify the pattern that's participating in. Give me an insight and an articulation. You've got 5 minutes and 5 sentences, right? You got to be careful how you grade this, right? You're going to be accused of subjectivity depending on how you do. Check plus, check minus suffices. You could give a lot of 4s out of 5s or 5s out of 5s if it is complete. But I think that this is something that many of my teachers now do 2 and 3 times a week, is to have close reading quizzes as their kind of bell ringer to start classes. And then once you've gotten kids in the habit of this, depending on how you want to structure this to make sure you get through everyone in a fair sense, you can do these kinds of close reading quizzes as oral quizzes. So you say, all right, here's a passage, a longer passage. I'm going to call on 3 of you to offer a close reading up at the board in 3 minutes. Everyone prepare, and then call on them one at a time to deliver a close reading in front of the class. I don't do that right now for exigent reasons, but it can be a fun thing to build if you have the right size of class over the course of a year. And then really what I'm suggesting here is to add close reading quizzes to your final exams if you give them in literature, to ask students to analyze new text at the end of a semester, at the end of a unit. We only give exams twice a year in literature, but I ask my teachers to make sure that they're not just offering students questions and passages that they already know. And then for writing assignments, these are just a number of phrases that I think you should use as you're talking with students, either about the assignment they're about to write or commenting on it. You should exhort them to go beyond class discussion. If they've simply reproduced class discussion, it is unlikely that they've done their own independent close reading. You should say about the kind of bodies of their paragraphs, summary is not analysis, right? You've told them what analysis is, you've identified close reading, you've told them that Ian's comment about the blubber was one, so they should know. And then this is something that I've started to do, especially with seniors, is to set out a number of trajectories through an assignment and say, all right, you guys can kind of see the pre-built trajectory that I'm offering you, but if you want an A on this paper, you have to go beyond in one of these different ways. And you can get more inventive with that and ambitious with it depending on the assignment, depending on the age of students. And then this is something that we're now doing across literature classes, is to use short assignments to build toward longer ones. So over the course of a semester or the course of a text, you might give a number of close readings that you're intending to be or close reading quizzes that you're intending to be collected as the source of the eventual assignment that students write about. So you might, over the course of reading Chaucer, make them write kind of over and again about chastity and loyalty and marriage. And then when you get to assigning that paper, you say, hey, these 4 things, go pull them out of your binder. They are the beginning of your paper. Your job is not to start from square one. It's to organize what you've already produced in terms of some initial readings and bring them together for a paper. We do that with Chaucer. We do that with the Scarlet Letter. We do that with Huckleberry Finn in 8th grade, some others. We can go quickly through this. This is a bunch of reading in the background as I talk about all these things. On class citizenship, To Know As You Are Known by Parker Palmer, this Quaker thinker in education. Really love this book. He talks about the idea of creating a truth-oriented community together where you're pledging your troth to one another in a class. Adam's Task is a book about dog training that was recommended to me by a guy who was on my senior thesis panel in high school who died a few years ago, Ian Lindquist, a wonderful and brilliant man. And it's an incredible book about education and creating a shared language together with those you're educating. The Proverbs are great on this. Some great books about education. Something You'll Not Forget by Joshua Gibbs, From Wonder to Mastery, is about science, but it's really impacted, teaching science really impacted how I've taught literature. In this vein, also Mathematics for Human Flourishing by Francis Sue is about math, but it's influenced how we've approached preparing for literature classes. Another sort of learning by James Shaw is a great collection of essays. I love his lectures. In one of his lectures, he recommended A Guide for the Perplexed, not by Maimonides, but by E.F. Schumacher, which is a meditation on knowledge. Discerning the Mystery is getting pretty philosophical, but it's a beautiful idea, or a beautiful meditation on how to recover a pre-Enlightenment sense of knowledge and epistemology. Poetic Knowledge by James Taylor is very similar. And then this is a new book. It's a collection of recent lectures by the theologian Judith Wolfe on the theological imagination. The first 4 chapters are really pertinent to art in a direct way. All right, I'm not going to end without offering you one more quotation, which I did promise you, from the philosopher, I guess literary critic, Paul Ricoeur, who says, and phenomenologist, "My deepest conviction is that poetic language, literature, alone restores us to that participation in or belonging to an order of things." Maybe this goes with Joshua's talk just before now of eventual goal of the moral imagination is to initiate students into a citizenship of the cosmos that begins maybe with good citizenship of your class, which must come along with good reading.
If you enjoyed this lecture, we encourage you to visit our website, k12.hillsdale.edu, for additional information on upcoming Hoogland Center events and other free resources for educators.